All right, good evening, everybody. It's Steve with Real Progressives in Action. I keep saying Real Progressives in Action because it's so natural to say Real Progressives, but in reality, it's Real Progress in Action. So tonight we're going to talk about these hypocrites called the deficit hawks. Deficit hawks are those people that are running around scolding everyone about spending too much money, spending. Oh, they're just always spending money. They're just blowing up the deficit. Those people. The same people that you see having no problem whatsoever blowing up the deficit for the military. Now, I'm not one of these people that sits there and uses that because I know better. I know that deficit thing, that's low-hanging fruit for people that don't understand the econ. But by putting it out there, this is kind of a volleyball match. They go ahead and they point. And they say, they're blowing it up. Oh, God, we're going to have to cut entitlements. We're going to have to cut all these programs. We're going to have to cut spending. And you got your fiscal cliffs that come in and they're, oh, my God, we got to reduce the deficit. It's at a moral crisis, for God's sake. Guys, get it out of there. It's a moral crisis. And you see this from the left. Guys, for realsies. We see this from Democrats. We see this from Republicans. And we see this, ironically, from even independents. This is such a pervasive thing. It's unbelievable. But Bernie Sanders penned an article. It's an op-ed that he put out there in the Washington Post. And this article is spot on. Of course, because Bernie Sanders is actually advised by what we call deficit owls. It's not a deficit dove, it's a deficit owl. In other words, smart deficits that make sense. In other words, we're trying to make sure that we do the right thing to have a balanced economy, not a balanced budget. Now, if that's too hard to understand, I certainly can understand that. Sometimes it's difficult to understand these wonky economic terms. The reality is federal government creates currency every time Congress spends. It's this debate about deficits and all that stuff, bankrupting the nation, being a moral crisis. It's a smokescreen. It's just political theater. In reality, quite frankly, deficits, they matter, but they only matter in terms of execution. Where are you putting your deficits? Who are you making more whole? Who are you making more susceptible to inequality, etc.? So let's go ahead and read what Mr. Bernard said here, because I think it's worth talking about, and I want to get it out there for everyone. So this Washington Post article was from December 16th, so it's a few days ago. It says, Bernie Sanders, an independent, represents Vermont in the Senate and is a candidate for the Democratic nomination for president. The Senate will be voting this week on the Trump military budget, which calls for a massive increase in deficit spending. Strongly oppose the legislation, just as I have all previous Trump military budgets. At a time when we have massive levels of income inequality, remember that's what I said, when half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, I bet it's more than that, when more than 500,000 Americans are homeless, and when public schools throughout the country are struggling to pay their teachers a living salary, it is time to change our national priorities. It's time to invest in the working families of this country and not a bloated military budget. Now, I will tell you, to be fair, there's no financial reason we couldn't do both. There isn't. If we were fascists and we wanted to do that, we could, and we are. But there's no financial, we're not going to bankrupt the nation. Let's just be clear. That's not the reason it matters. Anyway, I find it ironic when I and other progressive members of Congress propose legislation to address the many unmet needs of workers, the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. We invariably ask, how are we going to pay for it? Yet we rarely hear that question with regard to huge increases in the military spending, tax breaks for billionaires, or massive subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. Why is that? Our government is captured, my friends. Despite the fact that 87 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured, the establishment tells us every day. And folks, when he said establishment, he wasn't talking Republicans only. He's talking about Democrats too, right? So the establishment tells us every day that we cannot join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all as a human right through a Medicare for all single-payer system. Even though roughly half of older Americans have no retirement savings and 20% of senior citizens struggle to survive on an income of less than $13,500 a year. We have been told by the corporate elite that we must cut Social Security. Folks, this is why you need to learn MMT. Saying we need to cut Social Security, it's ignorant. It's ignorant. It's silly. Social Security is no more insolvent, no more unable to be paid than any other thing, than any other bomb we drop. It's all very easy, but you've been swept up in a bunch of bullshit. Thank God for Bernie Sanders. He says, while hundreds of thousands of bright young Americans are able to go to college are unable to go to college because of outrageous costs, and millions of Americans are drowning in student debt, we are told that we cannot afford to make public colleges and universities tuition-free or cancel student debt. Why not? The United States is the creator of the dollar. It controls all the rules around the dollar. It could easily cancel these debts. Easily. This is not a rocket science moment here. The United States is the currency issuer. It is the monopoly issuer of the U.S. dollar, and it controls all the laws surrounding the U.S. dollar. It has complete control, and it could easily do this. Why do you allow anyone to ever tell you otherwise? Think about it. At a time when 18 million families are paying more than half of their limited incomes on housing, we are told that it's too expensive to guarantee everyone in the United States a decent place to live, affordable childcare, and a job that pays a living wage with decent benefits. So, folks, that's neoliberalism right there. And it is pervasive, and it is not just in the United States. You see it in the UK. You see it in the European zone. You see it all over the world. Neoliberalism is teaching us all to be grateful for the peas, to eat our peas, and to shut up, speak when spoken to, and accept the crumbs given to us by capital. So when it comes to giving the Pentagon $738 billion, even more money than it requested, there's a deafening silence within Congress and the ruling elites about what our nation can and cannot afford. Congress will just authorize and appropriate all this money without one penny in offsets. No one asked. No questions asked. Folks, Congress will just authorize and appropriate all of this money without one penny in offsets. Let me just say this again, because every knucklehead in our movement fails on this. Complete grok fail. Congress will just authorize and appropriate all of this money without one penny in offsets. No questions asked. He didn't say tax dollars paying for. He said without one penny in offsets, no questions asked. I want you to think about this. So I find it curious that few of the deficit hawks are asking if it is fiscally prudent to be spending more on defense than the next 10 countries combined, more than half of our nation's discretionary budget. And there is little discussion taking place as to why the Pentagon, riddled with fraud, cost overruns, and corporate price fixing, is the only major agency of government that has not successfully undergone an independent audit. When I talk about changing national priorities, I'm talking about the fact that $120 billion increase in Pentagon spending compared with the final year of the Obama administration could have made every public college, university, trade school, and apprenticeship program in the United States tuition-free, eliminated homelessness, and provided universal school meals to every kid in our nation's public schools. Folks, I want to just stop right there for a second. When you have some other candidates that are economically illiterate, but they're saying these really cool, edgy things, doing these attention-grabbing, cool, edgy things, but yet their followers don't understand what Bernie's laying out there, but they have things to say. Things to say. Things to say. Uninformed things to say. You hear that. You realize what's at stake to get this wrong. The price of being wrong is really steep. And that's one thing we don't have the currency for, to be wrong this time. Too much at stake. Too much at stake to screw around with cool, edgy stuff. Get my drift? The time is long overdue for us to take a hard look at military spending, including the war on terror, and whether it makes sense to spend trillions more on endless wars that often cause more problems than they solve. Call me a radical, but maybe before funding new Space Force, we should make sure no American goes bankrupt because of a medical bill or dies because they can't afford to go to a doctor on time. Well, then that's something. Isn't that something? And it's very possible. The massive unpaid for defense bill is just one obvious example of the hypocrisy of deficit hawks in Congress and their corporate enablers. I want to talk about that word unpaid for. I don't like it. I understand why they're saying it, because they're using the language of the enemy, and they're trying to say, hey, you keep asking how we're going to pay for it, how we're going to pay for it. And that means you're looking for us to raise taxes or reduce spending to pay for these services and programs. But since this defense bill is not going to be paid for, you're not raising taxes. No one's asking where the money's coming from. They're saying, hey, this massive unpaid for bill, this defense bill, is just one obvious example of the hypocrisy of the deficit hawks in Congress and their corporate enablers. I want you to think about that now. They always ask the question, how are you going to pay for it when it comes to Medicare for all, or a national health service, or free college, or paid family and medical leave? How are you going to pay for that, dude? Where's that coming from? Other people's money? Only problem with socialism is eventually run out of other people's money. Liar. Bullshit. That's not how it works, right? Taxes are deleted. We know this. Those of us who actually have paid attention know that taxes do not actually pay for these programs. Taxes are the final culmination of a tax credit that was issued when Congress spent that money. The dollar is a tax credit, and when it comes back as a tax, it is done. It's done its job. It's lived a good life. And it's gone. So, where were these politicians, many of whom want to cut food stamps and affordable housing, when Congress passed a tax bill that provided more than $1 trillion in tax breaks to the wealthiest people and most profitable U.S. corporations? I don't really care about the U.S. corporate tax, and the reason why I say that is I believe that corporate taxes just end up being pass-through taxes to the buyers of their goods and services. However, I believe you could shift that tax burden to the CEOs, to the power brokers, and eliminate rents, eliminate unearned income, eliminate wealth inequality, because companies, invest all that money in lobbyists, etc. Tax that stuff, man. Don't sit there and tax corporations, because corporations just end up passing it on to us. It's just regressive. You don't even realize it. It sounds so good. Reality is we need to curb their ability to buy democracy, but taxing them, it's not going to change their bottom line. All it's going to do is take more money out of our pockets, period. However, the $1 trillion in tax breaks, the taxes weren't paying for anything. They just expanded buying power for those people up above. Now, I want you to think about this. If reducing corporate taxes and reducing the taxes on these wealthy people was supposed to be serving the purpose of trickle down to provide us with stimulus from the wealthy, because we're putting all our eggs in the rich people's baskets and hoping when they crack an egg that the yolk falls on our head. Okay? That right there is trickle down economics, and it doesn't work. So rather than quote unquote spending $1 trillion in tax breaks, why not spend that trillion on the people directly at the bottom? Money has a natural rising effect. You spend, goes up. Why not? Why not spend it on the people? Anyway. So as a result of Trump's tax giveaway to the rich, billionaires now pay a lower tax rate than the bottom 90% of Americans. And companies such as Amazon, General Motors, FedEx, Eli Lilly, and IBM pay nothing in federal income taxes after making billions in profits. Amazon founder and chief executive Jeff Bezos owns the Post, which is the one we're quoting from. Bernie says, I'm running for president because it's time for a new vision for America and a new set of priorities. Instead of massive spending on a bloated military budget, tax breaks for billionaires, and huge subsidies for the fossil fuel industry, we need to invest in the working families of this country and protect the most vulnerable. We need a government that represents all of us, not just the corporate elite. Now, let's take a moment and talk about this real quickly. You know, you see these other candidates on stage, and they got all these fancy ideas for about 5 minutes, but none of them are coherent. None of them actually are end-to-end. All of them are, you know, you got people caught up in these punchlines. And you know what? When you've got no chance of winning the presidency, when you got no chance of winning the nomination, you can say just about anything you want to say. Like if I knew I was only polling at 2%, I could run around telling everybody, taxes don't fund spending, taxes don't fund spending. But if I'm in the thick of the chase and I'm at the top, every single gaffe you make, every single thing that makes people question whether or not you're right or wrong, it's going to count against you. It sucks, but it's true. So it's great that we have people that have no prayer of making it, like Tulsi and Yang and others, who can sit there and say things when they're on stage or, you know, on running for office elsewhere. And they can say all these great things because in the end, they don't have a prayer in hell of getting elected. It's going to be a tough slog even with Bernie near the top for him to get there. Why is that? Because the Democratic Party rigs elections. The superdelegates are waiting there for a flooded field to not give them the number they need to be able to distinctly pick Bernie Sanders. So be on the lookout for superdelegates. In the meantime, though, we need to educate everyone. We, as progressives, need to be talking to our alternative media friends, some of whom are voting for those 2% candidates, and really, really make them understand how vital it is that we have a unified front that understands economics, not an ignorant group that doesn't quite get it. We need the people that know how to do it, which would be Stephanie Kelton and the rest of the modern monetary theory economists that support Bernie Sanders. They don't support Tulsi for some reason. For some reason, Tulsi hasn't enlisted people that understand economics. And I don't understand why that is, unless she didn't really intend to run for president. She's just there to kind of throw bombs to give cover. And that's cool if that's the case. But you have to ask yourself, why in the world, when a president's going to be having to advance a bold agenda, why they wouldn't understand economics and why they wouldn't pick the best and brightest so they can show the way for people so that they get behind it. It's questions you need to ask yourself because it's very important as we head into the election season. If you haven't registered to vote, make sure you do. My name is Steve Grumbine. I'm with Real Progress in Action. Have a great day, everyone. I'm out.